Okay, so the question is, how can I keep my zone 2 rides zone 2 without losing my mind? And uh, my answer here is going to be don't do that. Um, this is something I've talked about before. Zone 2 is super popular right now. Everyone thinks we should be doing it all the time. Zone 2, all day, every day. And there are really positive training adaptations that come from doing Zone 2. I'm going to list a few of them. You get increased mitochondrial density, muscle capillarization, plasma volume, oxygen utilization, glycogen and glucose storing and sparing, fat utilization, MCT1 expression, which is a monocarboxylate transporter, which is a certain type of lactate clearing. Okay, so all of those adaptations occur when you train at zone 2, but guess what? They also occur when you ride at tempo intensity, sweet spot, even threshold. And what the reality is you need a much larger volume of zone 2 riding in order to get those adaptations. The benefit of zone 2 and why it's touted so much and why it's so popular right now is because when you ride a zone 2, you get those adaptations without the same level of fatigue, particularly like central nervous system fatigue that you get when you ride at higher intensities like tempo, sweet spot, and threshold. However, you need significantly more volume of zone 2 in order to get those adaptations than you do riding in zone 3 and 4 or tempo, sweet spot, threshold. So we are always kind of in this push-pull with fatigue and stimulus adaptation. So zone 2 is really popular because you get these adaptations without the same level of resulting fatigue. However, you need to do so much more volume of zone 2 that it's just not viable for most people. So for most of the people that I coach, most of the people in my community, they don't have the time to make a ton of zone 2, to make zone 2 training really work for them. So I prescribe a ton of like 3 to 5 hour rides, kind of 5 being the very longest. 3 to 4 hours is kind of my preferred prescription for most people. Some people will need more volume, but for most people, a 3 to 4 hour ride, kind of rolling tempo intensity. You were on my group ride this weekend, that type of ride, you're just going to get more stimulus for the time than if you go out and do a super long, lower intensity ride. And you're not going to get excessive fatigue out of that. It's not crazy for most people. Again, I don't know you specifically, but most people can come out of a kind of 3 to 4 hour ride with a kind of across a range of intensities with really good stimulus, but they're not having to do these super long hours like you need to do with zone 2. So zone 2, it comes from a polarized training distribution where you do a ton of low intensity riding and very high intensity, very short intervals at well above threshold, VO2 anaerobic intervals, and you do very little training in the zone 3 and 4. But what that requires is this significant input of time in order to make the zone 2 effective. You cannot just go out and do 1, 2, even 3 or 4 hours of zone 2 is just not going to give you the stimulus that you need. And so that's why I am a much bigger fan of doing tempo, sweet spot, threshold, intensity. You're not doing it the whole time. It's just you're kind of riding at this rolling intensity where you're ramping up to threshold. You've got some sweet spot in there. You're at tempo sometimes. You're at zone 2 a lot of the time. But my point is you do not have to put a ceiling on it and ride at zone 2 unless you have a significant amount of time to devote to it. And honestly, I would argue that even if you do have the time, it's not optimal for most people. So that's not what you asked me. You asked me, how can you make it, how can you not lose your mind? I would tell you, don't even try. But again, that's my methodology. I will personally be very happy when we move on from this current trend where everyone's obsessed with zone 2, because I really think it's just very misunderstood. And There is a purpose and a reason for having every training intensity in a training plan at different times. But the current fascination, obsession with zone 2 is, I don't think it's helping us. So you're going to have to ask another coach to how to tolerate hours of zone 2.